distinguished panelists, and dear participants, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the joint webinar of Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies and Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement on navigating India's way in the Indo-Pacific. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partial think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies has been established to study, analyze, explain, and disseminate all relevant information and developments related to the Indo-Pacific region. Under the leadership of Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, several Indian specialists, scholar experts, and researchers are involved with it and are contributing their expert knowledge on all-round development in the Indo-Pacific region. Similarly, Indo-Pacific region is one of the major research interests of NICE as well. Hence, we came with this joint webinar with the founder of and honorary director of KIPS. Professor Mahapatra has been like my guardian since JNU days. He taught me foreign policy of US after Second World War during my master's. He supported me and guided me at his personal level at many occasions. I still remember him asking me to write an article on Nepal on 18th February 2009, for which I was paid 400 Indian rupees. That 400 Indian rupees is a huge amount for a JNU student in 2009, because even now I write, after a decade, I write many free articles. Jokes apart, what is most important is that it was the first article of my life. Professor Mahapatra, that makes you very special in my life, and I'm honored to have you here with us. Let me briefly introduce Professor Mahapatra. Professor Chintamani Mahapatra is currently Rector, also known as Pro Vice Chancellor of JNU, and Professor of American Studies at the School of International Studies of Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is the editor of Indian Foreign Affairs Journal and has held several positions such as member of UGC Review Committee, Area Studies Program, member of Fellowship Expert Committee of ICSSR, editor of Indian Foreign Affairs Journal, member of Editorial Board of Strategic Analysis, which is Journal of IDSA, member of Editorial Board of Diaspora Studies, and member of Committee of Studies, Academy of International Studies, Jamia, Milia, Islamia. Recently, he was Tagore Chair Professor at Yunnan, University of China. He has 4 books, 1 edited volume, and has contributed chapters on about 30 edited books. He has published 70 research articles and many more, which I might not have counted. He has been awarded a number of international fellowships, such as Fulbright Fellowship, Commonwealth Fellowship, Visiting Fellowship, to undertake research in the United States, UK, Austria, Australia, and many other countries. He has been a visiting faculty in several UGC-run Academic Staff Colleges, the Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs, National Defense College, Army War College, Naval War College, and College of Air Warfare. Today's program is moderated by Dr. Monish Taurangban. He's a visiting fellow at NIC, and he's also senior assistant professor at Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He's also the fellow at Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. He holds MPhil and PhD from JNU, New Delhi. Dr. Monish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pramod, for starting this very important discussion for which we have all gathered here. Before I welcome Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, my mentor as well, I would like to say a few words perhaps about why it is so important to have someone like Professor Chintamani Mahapatra speaking on a very pertinent theme, which is navigating India's way in the Indo-Pacific. And I think this has become all the more important given the recent events like the border standoff between India and China, and also the emerging confrontational streak between US and China, and also the kind of Chinese actions which have been recorded and reported in hotspots like the South China Sea in recent times. So I think it is a very opportune time for NIS as well as KIPS to be organizing this discussion and this lecture by Professor Mahapatra. And it is an honor for us, all of us gathered here, to be able to have the opportunity to listen to someone like Professor Mahapatra, because he was perhaps one of the earliest scholars, and academics in India who initiated discussions on the Indo-Pacific even before Indo-Pacific had become the fashionable thing to talk about in IR academia and policy making elites. He, as the editor, as was mentioned, of the Indian Foreign Affairs Journal, had way back in 2014 initiated a very important discussion on Indo-Pacific, has also been instrumental in holding conferences, building bridges between experienced scholars as well as young scholars to talk and comment on the Indo-Pacific, and very recently came out with an edited volume on the rise of the Indo-Pacific, and in terms of analyzing and assessing the diverse perspectives on the Indo-Pacific. So without further ado, I will not stand between the audience and Professor Chintamani Mahapatra. I welcome Professor Chintamani Mahapatra to deliver his lecture. Sir.
Namaskar, very good evening to friends from Nepal and friends from India. And this is actually a great occasion for me, because I remember teaching Pramodji, who is now the director of the institute in Kathmandu. And this is the first, this is not the first, this is the second collaboration we are having with a foreign country, a think tank. And the earlier one was with the Center for International Relations, Warsaw. And when Pramod approached me very promptly, I said, okay, I think their institute also doing very well. Now, the topic is actually crucial. And the theme in a way was articulated, the title by Pramod himself, Navigating India's Way in the Indo-Pacific. Now, when everything is going well and the sea is calm, and navigating is not so difficult. But right now, the ocean of politics in all the countries in the Indo-Pacific rim and even in the hinterland is actually turbulent. And because of the turbulence currently going on, the theme becomes very, very important, navigating India's way in the Indo-Pacific. Normally, I talk more about the US and China and others, but by putting the title, Navigating India's Way in the Indo-Pacific, it is both relevant and a little difficult for me, but I will try to handle this. Now, I'll not give a very long lecture. Generally, I don't. I'll flag a few important points. Then we can have a Q&A. Anyone and everyone can make a very brief observation or raise a question. So that way, all of us can benefit from this webinar and learn more. And I'm sure that at the end of this webinar, all of us, including me, will a little more wise than what we are right now. Now, in the three components of my presentation, the first one is to highlight the current disorder or the turbulence that is going on in this region, very, very briefly. Number one, of course, this coronavirus pandemic, which has affected almost every country in the world, including the countries in the Indo-Pacific. Hundreds of thousands of people have been affected very badly. Some people are only counting the number of deaths, but those who are infected, not many people even discuss or think about the pain that they undergo when they're infected. The economy is completely down in almost all the countries. Unemployment rate is rising like almost an express train. And then the manufacturing has almost stopped. Remittances of money by the migrant workers, both within the country and outside the countries, has come down heavily, which has really added to the woes of the family members who are getting some money from their near and dear ones who are working abroad and all. Tourism is no longer possible. Hospitality industry is also suffering like anything. people who are getting more and more used to going out and eat there. It's not just a question of not able to go. Imagine the restaurant business and all, they're all down. So more important, in my view, apart from this physical, visible turbulence that we're witnessing is, of course, I do not have any figure, but I'm almost sure that a large number of people from all walks of life are having some kind of mental health problem. Now, this mental health does not mean that they're going mad. The mental health, it can be tremendous amount of boredom, it can be depression, it can be, thinking weird things in the midst of uncertainty because they don't know how life is going to evolve. And when the headlines are saying life is not going to be the same again, then again that is creating some kind of mental problem. More importantly for this group, including me, education has been thoroughly disrupted. More than 1.6 billion school-going children around the world are staying at home. And of course, those schools and colleges which are able to offer online education, imagine the plight of the parents. Some of them are working parents and they have to work from home, and then the child is at home, and then there is online education for the children. And imagine this multiple problem that people are facing, contributing to the mental health problem. Now, when everyone is trying to use the internet, including all of us part of this webinar, and in very many ways, using internet for both education and entertainment and connectivity, another problem has cropped up, not just Indo-Pacific, everywhere, that is insecurity in the cyberspace. The hackers are very active. Phishing and other kinds of cybersecurity problems are really rising by the day. And millions of rupees or dollars are being siphoned off by the hackers and all. Now, in this kind of background, when life of ordinary people has become difficult and the economy has come to a near standstill, I mean, talking about the Indo-Pacific and how India is going to navigate or already navigating is very crucial for all of us. So this is the first component of my presentation, the current issue. It's pretty long, but let me be brief here. Now, what are the major developments now for our analysis? Now, one of the things that I think Monish just highlighted about China flexing its military muscle. On the one hand, Chinese government is bragging that although the coronavirus started in China, we have been able to win the war against the virus. Our economy is slowly getting back to the rail. People are going back to work. Children and students are going back to schools and colleges and the universities. We are ready to do business. And then in the meantime, offering all kind of medical equipment to combat the COVID-19 to other countries, including in Europe. And in fact, many consignments went even to the United States of America. Now, on the other side, there is another major player in the Indo-Pacific region, which is the United States of America. The US is still struggling with the problem. And in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, at the moment, 1/3 of the American states are witnessing a spike in the number of coronavirus infected. The whole country is now facing tremendous amount of resistance to police brutality, and people are coming out to the streets. And Donald Trump, the American president, using words which are venomous for the American people, saying that I'm going to set the dogs against people who are coming to White House. I'm going to deploy the military to handle all these things. So this has created a lot of political polarization and social instability in the United States of America. The American economy, again, is facing considerable downturn, and they are struggling very hard, opening up business in a very big way despite the pandemic, so that they don't lose out in the game of business and trade and investment. Now, these two powers in the Indo-Pacific, USA and China. In the midst of the pandemic, they are quarreling, and this is bitter quarrel. Of course, the quarrel had started even pre-pandemic, particularly in the wake of imposition of high tariff against the Chinese products, but also so many other areas, including the Chinese activities in the South China Sea, reclaiming islands, building military facilities, claiming a large chunk of area as large as India as their own, and quarreling with the neighbors, raising all kinds of disputes, and then saying air identification zone so that nobody can fly even in that area without informing the Chinese, and on all such issues. Add to the list the Taiwan problem. The Americans want to give more and more military equipment, to sell more and more military equipment to Taiwan, and China doesn't like it. Then look at what is happening in Hong Kong. China, I think, hit the last nail on the head and said, no more freedom of the kind that Hong Kongese were enjoying. So American Congress particularly, Donald Trump is not talking too much on Hong Kong, but Congress is pulling up its socks and tightening the belt to do something about Hong Kong. Then on pandemic itself, when Donald Trump is repeatedly saying that China is responsible for the pandemic, it began in China, it's a China virus, the Chinese think it is going to be a very, very big loss, very, very big loss for the for the Chinese image outside. It may affect their trade and business as well. It will hit their self-image and the way people perceive China outside. So they are really angry on this pandemic. On aviation, China did not allow the American aircraft to enter, and America has stopped Chinese aircraft to enter. On media, the Trump administration said that the number of Chinese journalists working in the United States should be less. And China, in the meantime, threw out some of the American journalists who were working for Wall Street Journal and New York Times and CNN and others. So the differences between the US and China is escalating to a point which I would argue as cold confrontation. And this confrontation is unfolding right now. It is going to deepen and expand and become more serious in coming weeks and months and years and all. This is number one. Number two, the way China has almost abandoned its policy of peaceful rise of China, win-win development for everyone. China is going to help everyone and everybody should cooperate with China, a common and shared destiny for mankind. All those things are now gone, almost abandoned. Now, in the morning when I was chairing a session and the former Foreign Secretary, Ambassador, what's his name? Some ambassador, former Foreign Secretary was speaking, I made an announcement that just 1 hour before that particular session began, the Chinese, there was a report that China was doing a massive military drill near the Indian border, and the Chinese media wrote about it, but did not identify the exact area where they were doing the drill. This major military drill was organized just about a day after the top military officers from China and India talked to each other, and the reports came that it was a very cordial discussion between the two sides, and they will indulge more and more in discussing with them, both at the diplomatic level as well as the military level. So on the one hand, you engage the Indians in talk. On the other hand, you start more and more military drill, sending a different kind of signal. In South China Sea currently also, the Chinese aggression against Vietnam in the waters and the Philippines and Malaysia is creating a lot of problem in South China Sea. And the way China is flexing its muscle is giving an indication that at a time when the Americans and the rest of the world are now discoursing on relative American decline and the rise and ascendance of the Chinese power and the possibility of China replacing the USA as a #1 military power. Now, in this backdrop, China, by and large, resolving the pandemic issue, and America is still struggling very hard. It is creating problem in the minds of the leaders of the region. Is America going to be a security provider anymore? Can the US help them maintain the security if China continues to flex its muscle and grab territories, either maritime area or the land border and all? So big questions are coming. Interestingly, most of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region, including India, find that China has become an extremely important trade partner. For some of them, it's an investment partner. American alliance, American allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia included, they do more trade with China than with the United States of America. So the question everyone is raising is, in a confrontation that is going on between the two, one, the current superpower, and the other one, the emerging superpower, what position they should take? They have military collaboration with the United States, and they find in China an economic partner. And China is flexing the military muscle not against the United States, against small countries. So what would they do? If they support the US, there is a problem. And if they oppose the Chinese, there is a problem. If they support the Chinese, then it will be accepting the Chinese aggrandizement. So what to do? Now, in this, the most important standoff, or you can say some confrontation, is of course between China and India. Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia are relatively smaller countries. They are important. They are facing the heat from Beijing. But there is a standoff between India and China. This standoff is not a sudden eruption. It's not. This kind of standoff at a lower level goes on intermittently along the Sino-Indian border. And everybody knows that. Now, when India would like to navigate in this water, on the one hand, we are trying to build up our ties with the United States more and more, both on matters related to military and economy, trade, investment, even social relationship, educational collaboration, science and technology collaboration, and a whole host of it. And of course, quote unquote, big strategic partnership. The Chinese are not able to accept this. They think that the Trump administration, like its predecessor, is trying to contain the growth of China. And the Indians are now siding with the United States. Now, when India supports a resolution in WHO on doing some investigation into the origin of the coronavirus pandemic, China takes offense. On the supply chain, when the Japanese, American, European companies are saying that it's very difficult to rely on a country like China right now for the behavior they are doing and all. Now, in this kind of background, they are toying with the idea of removing the supply chain connection with China and build new ones, maybe more regional, maybe closer to home. So in that, when India is trying to say that if any company would like to come to India and invest, then the Chinese don't like it. Of course, in my personal view, the way it is articulated in the Indian media, I oppose that. For everything, you don't have to bring in a China connection. If you have an opportunity and you can give that opportunity to any multinational company from any country to come and invest and do business, so do so. why for everything you do, you have to link it up with China? Oh, they are leaving China, we want them to come to India. So this is actually bad politics, bad articulation, and horribly bad discourse in my personal view. But the fact remains, Chinese people, as well as companies and the government, they have taken note of all these Indians. They want to weaken China by alluring the companies to leave China and come to India. Then on RCEP, at the last moment, India walked out of it, giving a rationale. But if you see from the Chinese perspective, India, which was not part of the TPP and very much part of RCEP, now it is walking out of RCEP. It's no good. And also because they link it up with India's opposition to Belt and Road Initiative. For India has its own rationale, own reasons as to why it is opposing. But the fact remains that the Beijing does not like it. And then, of course, recently when we took a different position and abrogated the Article 370 in Kashmir, again, China very quietly, in a very controlled way, but revolted. And probably right now, whatever they're doing is partly in response to our new policy towards Jammu and Kashmir and all. So on all these issues, the Chinese are upset. You add even Tibet issue. So from the Indian side, again, we are very upset with the Chinese policy. The way they support Pakistan. Supporting Pakistan, not a problem. But supporting the terrorist groups in Pakistan is a problem for everyone. Now, collaborating with Pakistan on arms transfer, even nuclear issues, not a problem for India. They may do whatever they want. But encouraging Pakistan and supporting them indirectly and protecting them in international fora when the issues come up for all their anti-Indian activities, obviously India would not like it. Except China, who else is there to support Pakistan just on such issues like terrorism and all? So India doesn't like it. In the NSG, now the whole world will say, okay, India should be a member of NSG, but China will say, no, right? And similarly, on the UN Security Council, everybody knows that Chinese will be the last one to support Japanese entry into UN Security Council if there is a reform and the number of permanent members increase. But so blatantly they oppose India's membership there. Then they will say, if you make India a member, then Pakistan could be now. Let Pakistan also become a member. So, and then of course, on matters of trade and investment, we have opened up in India about $93 billion of trade, and we buy the most and sell the least, and the Chinese market is closed. Although the Chinese government, unlike the Indian government, has that ability, that power, the systemic power to do whatever they want to do to reduce the trade deficit, they would not do that. So in the Indo-Pacific, the Sino-US confrontation and Sino-Indian standoff are the two most important developments. And there are so many other developments, of course. Now, in this kind of background, what is India doing? And how India is trying to navigate. I'll give you 6-7 points very briefly, one line, two lines on what India is doing. Number one is, of course, India is actively supporting what many people call a Quad, Q-U-A-D, quadrilateral. Now, when US, Australia, Japan, and India are forming some kind of informal exchange, informal group to exchange notes on defense, security, and other developments in the Indo-Pacific, China draws a clear conclusion. The whole idea is to contain China. I mean, they don't have to do that. And why? US and Japan are already alliance partners. 30,000 to 40,000 American troops are stationed in Japan. And there are so many military bases. Same is the story with US and South Korea, and US and Australia. India is the new strategic partner. So what is new? if these four countries are coming together and discussing what is new. India has strategic partnership with Japan. And recently you saw we signed an agreement on logistics with Australia and with the United States, So there's nothing new. But the way they're painting this, here is a new body coming to, contain China. But what I am saying is not important. What China perceives is important. And they perceive it as an anti-China forum. But for India, of course, in order to meet the challenge from China, and as I described what all they are doing, it is important to team up with other important countries as a good balance. There's no doubt about it. Is periodically holding Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, bringing in some major parts from outside and all the Indian Ocean Rim Association. This is also an Indian initiative. How to maintain peace and order in Indian Ocean region. Of course, we would love to have similar kind of peace and development in South China Sea. In South China Sea, the China dominates. In Indian Ocean, India, because of its geography, dominates. Now, China has come into Indian Ocean in a very big way now, and they have established a base there in Djibouti, and they're certainly going to make a base, build a base in Pakistan and all. And they're trying to use the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka as well, and they're doing their best to do that. Now, what India is doing is, India is not able to go in the same fashion that China is coming, because China has the naval power is much larger and much bigger, but still the Indian Navy also goes to South China Sea. The oil companies in India try to explore oil in the Vietnamese maritime region. The Chinese object. We also object when China comes with their submarines to Indian Ocean. We think that Chinese are trying to encircle India. But India is also doing whatever it should do in South China Sea within India's ability. Now, more recently, in the middle of the pandemic, this is very interesting and very important to take note. In the midst of the pandemic, we have so many patients. Every day the number is going up, and now almost 9,000, 10,000. Even then, India is not behaving like a selfish giant. India is doing whatever it can for its neighbors, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. Number one, I would highlight you the medical mission, the Navy. The Navy is selling to Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Madagascar, and giving them medical equipment so that they can fight COVID-19. This multilateral or plurilateral initiative is part of the strategy to navigate in the waters of the Indo-Pacific region. Then there are 7 countries that include USA, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam. Now, almost on a weekly basis, the leaders of all these countries are discussing about economic recovery in the globe, not just in the region, in the globe, but particularly in the Indo-Pacific. Why particularly in the Indo-Pacific? Because as the World Bank has forecasted, the US economy is still going to be negative next year, and so is European economy. The only region where there can be growth is Indo-Pacific. So the Americans, Europeans, and including us and the Chinese and Japanese are looking at Indo-Pacific region. So how best to revive the economy and restore trade and investment relationship? These countries are talking with one another. China is not part of it. And then there is another group of countries. They are also discussing about similar economic issues, but how to develop new supply chains. Because of the disruption caused, and the Chinese behavior is not acceptable to many, is there a way out? In fact, if you see from the Chinese perspective, they're worried that most of the raw materials from Africa and the oil from the Middle East that pass through Indian Ocean, right, and the Malacca Strait. So one of the reasons why they're having CPEC and that Belt and Road Initiative is to enable themselves to get all these important supplies on the land route. They're trying to do that. So every country does that, and we're doing it. So all these countries, India, USA, Japan, Australia, South Korea, interestingly, Brazil and Israel, they are discussing on how best to reduce the dependence on China. Frankly, the US economy is so interconnected with the rest of the world that if it tumbles, the global economy will tumble. In the recent years, the way China has grown, if the Chinese economy doesn't do well, it is going to have cascading effect on the global economy. See, when the commodity prices went down, what happened to the Latin American economies? Now that the oil price is so down, one of the reasons is because there's no demand at all. If the Chinese industries don't start functioning, who will demand oil? Same with India and so many other countries. So China's economy is interconnected very well with the rest of the world. So how best to reduce the dependence on China, diversify? So they are discussing on this. Then as a military measure, as an insurance policy, in order to safeguard its interest if something goes wrong, India is doing another thing to navigate. And that is, we have been signing mutual logistics cooperation agreement with many countries. And which are those countries? USA, done. France, South Korea, Singapore, very recently with Australia, and in the near future, we are going to sign a similar agreement with Japan so we can use each other's naval facilities or other base facilities for refueling, for recreation, for repair, and all these things, right? So, and there is another important plurilateral, I keep admitting people, there is another important thing that India is doing is because of the global recession and the American economy in a way shaky and the uncertainty around, India is trying to have some kind of currency swap agreement with some of our regional countries like Sri Lanka and others. So this is the big picture that I gave. I don't know how much time I've taken. I've taken a lot of time already. So this is the big picture I gave. Now, let me not give any conclusion so that I can hear other people's voice and their questions, their queries, their doubts, and then I'll conclude in the end. So that will make it more interesting and dynamic. So Manish, let me stop here. I just gave you the picture. We'll interpret it later, right?
Yes.
So now it's up to you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Of course, as always, for illuminating everyone with such a lecture that gives a lot of food for thought in terms of the dynamics of this region and specifically the complexities abound in terms of how India is going to navigate the emergence or the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has only added to the complexities which were already there. And Professor Chintamani Mahapatra has, in very well-fashioned, I think, given a broad picture and also given a lot of points on which we can deliberate further. Before we start the question and answer session, Vivek, we had some intervention to be made.
Yeah, so thank you, Monish. There is, I thought we will introduce a young KIPS member who has sung this song. So just to lighten the mood, and then we'll flow into the Q&A. So I'll just start. It's a short clip. I hope you'll like it.
Your lipstick stains on the front of my left side brace. I knew I would forget you, so when I animate you, blow my mind. Your sweet moonbeam, the smell of you in every single dream I dream. I knew when we collided, but the one I had decided was one of my kind. Hey, soul sister, ain't that Mr. on the radio, stereo, the way you move ain't fair enough. Hey, soul sister, I don't wanna miss a single thing you do tonight. Hey, 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 just in time. I'm so glad you have a one-track mind like me. You gave my life direction, a game show of connection. We can't deny. I'm so obsessed. My heart is bound to be right in my unchained chest. I believe in you, like a virgin, you're Madonna, and I'm always down to wonder you're mine. Hey, soul sister, ain't that Mr. on the radio, stereo, the way you move ain't fair enough. Hey, soul sister, I don't wanna miss a single thing you do.
If you've heard the original song, I'm sure you will notice that there's hardly a difference. So I hope you enjoyed it. Over to you, Monish. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, and thank you, Dynamic Annie, for such a beautiful song and positive distraction, from a very serious discussion on geopolitics and international security issues. There are, of course, the way it has gone, I think there are many more questions that are coming up from our audience. I would like to begin with one or two, and then we can take more questions as we go ahead. Sir, one of the first important questions, I think, which has been raised by a participant and which directly flows from your lecture, which is briefly you had mentioned about the importance of how China perceives rather than what we say. So I think the question is about the same perception and misperception regarding India's Indo-Pacific policy and strategy and how it is perceived back in Beijing. And the question is, to what extent India has been successful or not successful nailing to Beijing that India's Indo-Pacific strategy or India's Indo-Pacific approach is not anti-China, or it is not meant to contain China. Your comments on that, sir? Sir has been muted.
Okay. Actually, a lot of things are happening between India and China, which are neither noted by the scholars and commentators, nor even they're aware of it. I'll give you one example from my own experience. On a daily basis, hundreds of Indians from Kolkata and from other areas, they go to China. And they go and buy stuff and come back and do business in India on a daily basis. A couple of years ago, when I was traveling myself, I was shocked. In the whole plane, 2 Chinese, rest all Indians. And we landed in Kunming. And I was the only person who was going out through the exit door. The rest were going in a different direction. So I asked one guy, where are you going? Then he says, no, sir, we are all businessmen. We are going to some other city. Oh. Now, on my return, I saw a similar kind of situation. You cannot believe the number of Indians who are doing business in China, which is not part of your trade statistics of either Government of India Commerce Department or the Chinese Commerce Department, or even the journalists not able to take note of it, it is going on. Then Kolkata and Kunming, a dialogue process also goes on. Now, it is not for nothing that we have been doing trade with China, the total amount being almost $100 billion. If China is truly an enemy country, how can we do trade to such an amount? That's not an enemy country. We also know very well that in the border, even I talked about the border tension and the standoff that's going on. Imagine for a moment the border along Pakistan, LOC. LOC is always active 24/7. Some shooting, some bomb blast, all the time happens. In the Sino-Indian border, a little bit of fisticuff and push and pull. And why it is like this? It is because China and India are large countries, old civilization, matured countries, aspiring global players and all. So that is why. That is why. So this, and there is no shooting war at all. The guns don't bark and the bombs don't explode, right? So this is another point. There are so many issues where China's interest and India's interests are complementary. Then let me give you another interesting example. It's not just on the issue of global commons where we are together. Even on certain issues, if China and India really try to remove their misperception, promote positive perception, then what can happen in the world? India-China relationship in coming years and months can be the most dynamic, powerful, influential relations in the history of international relations. Long border, 3,400 plus kilometers of border. China and India, look at the size. If we cooperate, the way the Americans are able to cooperate with Mexico, and Mexico still thinks that Texas is part of Mexico, right? So if Mexico and Canada and US come together and have an agreement for trade and business, what are we doing? If China and India become part of one market, is there any market which can be larger than this market? So nobody is thinking about all this positive dimension of China and India. So when I'm saying that perception has to change, in China, perception about India is also very archaic. They don't understand India, frankly. Similarly, in India, the moment something happens, then people get their perception from watching Times Now or Republic TV, where many people bark, on so many issues. China ye kar diya, India ye karne wala hai. Now, in the process, what happens? The concrete, the important, the fundamental issues get lost. So, who is responsible for this? There has to be conscientious analysts, thinkers, even important members of the strategic community in India and China for much more dialogue in number and in depth. If that can happen, many things can be clear. Now, even I said during my lecture, oh, look at Pakistan, China is doing ABCD and all. See, in 62, China attacked India. 65, Pakistan attacked India. Did China support Pakistan? To the extent it could? No. In 71, we had a war and Pakistan got divided. What did China do? Well, not much. Then again, we had the Kargil war. What did China do? Not much. What does it mean? It means even China is a pragmatic country and finds out if it takes a policy, whether it is going to benefit China or not benefit China. Pragmatic people. So instead of getting emotional about 62, if we become more pragmatic and engage them in proper dialogue and explain them what we really want or what we are doing, then probably, this is my hunch, probably things will get better.
Thank you, sir. So, a very important question and perhaps related to the institution that is responsible for hosting this discussion. One of the points that has been raised is regarding a landlocked country like Nepal. And given the fact that we are talking about Indo-Pacific and how India's intentions are being Indo-Pacific, the question is how Nepal, which has relations with both India and China, and which has borders with both countries, and given the perception of Nepal in India, how can Nepal benefit from an Indo-Pacific strategy?
You see, Indo-Pacific does not mean only the countries in the Indo-Pacific rim. Now, in this era of globalization and IT revolution and transportation revolution and movement of people from one country to the other, the landlocked concept is meaningless. If it is not picking up, then of course there is a problem. Why it is not picking up? That has to be resolved. But all kinds of opportunities are there on the table for every country to take advantage of. Of course, there are certain level of physical difficulties for a landlocked country, particularly it is small and particularly it is sandwiched between two major powers. There will be so many titbit on small matters, and perceptions will depend on what you see on the newspaper or watch on the television, right? If you talk to the diplomats, if you talk to responsible people who understand the subject, it's totally different. If you read the newspapers, and of course, in a country like India, where you have election almost every week, somewhere or the other, either Gram Panchayat or some municipality or state election, national election, issues become very political. And the members make all kinds of opinions which actually shape the perception of the common people. The problem lies there, right? But at the same time, I must appreciate and I must say that Nepal being a very small country, a landlocked country, and China also has a border with Nepal and so is India. Nepal also needs to navigate in this difficult terrain. So sometimes it will be win, sometimes it will lose. And one has to move on this. So I would like for example, I think 2 years ago when I went to Kathmandu, somebody invited me to give a lecture. I wanted to speak on Indo-US relationship, my comfort area, right? They said, no, you speak on BRI, China's BRI. I spoke. So the who's who of the town were there, of course, top officers and all, they were there. As an individual, as a teacher, I said, look, I'm not government of India. I'm not chief of the Indian Army or anything. A simple teacher. I have certain understanding about BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Let me explain. You may take it, you may leave it, right? Then I explain that a country like China, which is purely a big power, now an economic power, increasingly becoming a military power, it has its own ways to do things. Don't go by what the leaders say, what the speech makers speak. Go by what they do. If you really want to understand China, I gave the example of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, China came, gave money, capital, and sent technicians and engineers and built Hambantota port. Soon the Sri Lankan found that they don't even have money to pay the interest of the loan. And what did China do? China said, no, sign an agreement. For 99 years, Hambantota is under our control. Sovereignty of our Hambantota gone. Ecuador, distant country in Latin America. It will give you $12 billion. It's a small country in Latin America. $12 billion. But you sign this agreement for next 99 years. You will sell 90% of the oil only to China. And they signed it and now they're repenting it. Look at Pakistan. In Pakistan, the government is different and the people are different, right? The government under pressure, of course, has accepted on the headline $60 billion of Chinese money for CPAC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, right? But in reality, the Chinese give the capital, the Chinese send the technicians and the engineers and the workers. So a good economist in Pakistan raises a question. It is public document. How does Pakistan benefit? Money is there, technicians are there, engineers are there. And then when some Pakistani people create problem for the Chinese citizens in Pakistan, can you believe 12,000 Pakistani soldiers are employed to give physical security to the Chinese there? I mean, is it really a very transparent way of doing business and all? So I simply said that don't go by the statements of the political leaders. Always make analysis on the basis of the action and the repercussion, right? I'll say the same thing about India also. If India is offering something, not offering something, analyze on the ground. Don't use only sentimental thing, either India is against Nepal or Nepal is against India. So this is what I would advise my friends from Nepal.
Thank you, sir. I think the next question is also quite interesting. And I would like to remind everyone in the audience who already don't know that one of the most seminal works on US role in the growth of ASEAN is written by Prof Chintamani Mahapatra. And so I think the question, sir, is about integrating India's look is policy and what we call now as the act is policy and its look west policy. So to say India's approach to the extended neighborhood. How important is it and how India is going to navigate this issue of ASEAN centrality, but at the same time, the challenges that small countries in ASEAN themselves face when confronting big China?
You see, until recently, the best example of regional integration was Europe. Now, Europe is facing an existential threat. So the best example of regional cooperation is going on, right? Next best example was ASEAN. It started as the Big Five, then became 6, and now ASEAN 10. The evolution of ASEAN is wonderful. Here is an institution where the democratic countries, the authoritarian countries, the communist countries, all are part of it, right? Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, communist countries. And then you have other countries which are not democratic. Now, during the Cold War time, of course, the Americans were backing them 100%, and they were growing. In the 1980s, some of the ASEAN member countries became economically dynamic, like Singapore, for example. Later Malaysia, and then even Indonesia, Thailand. You know, they followed the policy of Taiwan and South Korea and went for export-oriented industries, and they became very important. Now, the moment the Cold War ended, then they faced again a survival crisis. What is to be done? In '93, they had a dinner diplomacy in Singapore, and they came out with the idea that in the absence of a real common enemy, difficult to keep all these countries together. So let's have AR. ASEAN reality started from there. It's a wonderful concept. And they tried to bring America and Russia and all, and China into ASEAN. Slowly, when China had money to invest abroad, then China's connection with ASEAN became solid in terms of investment, in terms of trade, and all. So at that moment, India was also growing from late 1980s. Now, within ASEAN, there are members who are very uncomfortable with the Chinese way of doing things. Vietnam, for example, right? Even Cambodia and Laos. Singapore, of course, is a different ballgame altogether. So ASEAN could never be united on its views on China. And that is ASEAN problem. On South China Sea, when 3 or 4 ASEAN countries are disputant to the sovereignty issue with China, ASEAN is not united. ASEAN doesn't care for their own members like Malaysia and Philippines and say, all right, you handle this with China bilaterally, which is almost saying that nothing can be done about it. Even then, for ASEAN survival and looking at the big picture of stability in the Indo-Pacific region, ASEAN centrality is a good concept because there is no major power there, there is no nuclear power there, there is no economic heavyweight there, but they're all countries with a smart elite who know how to develop consensus and run the show. So even India also says that yes, we must accept ASEAN centrality because they're a neutral group of countries. And if we take ASEAN into consideration, the whole idea of Indo-Pacific connectivity and all can be a good initiative, because if India proposes something, there'll be a lot of questions. If China proposes something, there'll be still more number of questions, right? So if ASEAN does something, ASEAN centrality does not mean that ASEAN leadership. You must understand this. ASEAN centrality means ASEAN will play a central role, but other important countries will have their own voice. And that's a good thing, and I support it.
Thank you, sir. The next question is also flowing out from something that you had mentioned in your lecture. So you had spoken about the Quad. The question is on the recent discussions and debates on the probability of a Quad Plus, and if yes, what is it going to look like, and how the 4 Quad countries conceive Indo-Pacific, and how much of differences they have when looking at the Indo-Pacific.
You see, if you go to the bottom line, and the worst case scenario, the United States has adequate capability to contain China, to punish China, to destroy China. Of course, the heavy loss for America also, right? But if you go by the real politic, no country thinks like worst case scenario and I'll do everything by myself. They always bring on board as many member countries as possible and try to handle the situation in a multilateral way that gives them political strength, and that also leads to defense burden sharing and all. Now, Quad is an example. Quad actually is more of a signaling than of an institution. As I described, the Chinese flexing of military muscle and assertive behavior over the years. Now, and nobody talks about China's peaceful life anymore. And those countries which have good economic ties with China, they think that China can blackmail. And China does blackmail. More recently to Australia. When Australia said, let us do some investigation about the origin of the COVID-19 virus, China imposed sanctions on Australia. Right? So out of this fear, these major powers, India, Japan, Australia, and USA, all are democratic countries. They are not run by any communist country and all. And most of them are economically dynamic and militarily advanced. So it is basically taking down notes, exchanging views, and together. So if things go wrong, by sharing their ideas and the views and the strategies and all, they will try to maintain stability and not allow any country to dominate and to bully the smaller countries. And they think China is really bullying the smaller country. Let me tell you that China has a lot of investment in Cambodia. The latest, I think yesterday, I saw on the tweet today, Cambodia has given a particular port for use by the Chinese Navy. A small, tiny country under the control of China economically makes a statement. This port is not for any one country. If the Americans want it, we're open, please come. If India comes, India can go. Philippines had said almost goodbye to America. That status of force agreement, they wanted to abrogate again. But now, again, because of the Chinese activities in the Mischief Reef and so many other areas, the Philippines had come back. The Philippines is going to continue that military relationship with the United States. Malaysia and Indonesia are really cheesed off with Chinese assertive behavior and all. Right? So, Quad is the beginning of an experiment. Subsequently, it can expand. If the goal is to make China a stakeholder and be part of an arrangement for maintaining peace and stability, yes, we'll go ahead. Otherwise, there is a mechanism.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the next is also an interesting question regarding the reports about Trump's offer for mediation between India and China, and the subsequent statements that came from both our foreign ministry and the Chinese foreign ministry that we had established mechanisms and it was on a de-escalatory route. What does this tell about this equation, the India-China-US equation? And what is our expectation from the United States? Your comments, sir.
You see, the United States initially made use of China to contain the spread of the former Soviet Union. Right? Now, they want to make use of India to contain the spread of the Chinese influence. But India is not Japan, India is not South Korea, and India is not Australia. Right? Now, unlike the Chinese, who first went with the Soviets, then with the Americans, now they are going to behave like India. India, from the very beginning, says that we are an autonomous power, will remain so. On military conflicts, we will not take sides with either of the group. Of course, the final decision will depend on the reality on the ground. But as a matter of policy, we will maintain our strategic autonomy to decide things as and when the problems arise and all. So it is because of that that India said that in spite of the strategic partnership, Mr. Trump, we don't accept you as a mediator. China, again, China was first in saying that no, we don't want any kind of third party interference. Actually, if you make a survey of the news reports in China, it is very balanced, very balanced. Of course, in India, partly because of the nature of Trump and partly because of importance of the United States, we did not poo-poo the idea, we did not reject it, but we did not accept it. So China rejected, India did not accept. And I think it's a very good thing, very good step.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is also quite interesting. This is regarding India-Russia relationship and the role of Russia in Indo-Pacific, specifically after Prime Minister's visit to the Vladivostok summit and our investment in the Far East. So it's also interesting, sir, let me put this way, that after the pandemic, Mike Pompeo had a virtual conference with Jaishankar, and Pompeo was urging Jaishankar to stand up in this coalition against for making China accountable. But we also simultaneously, back to back, we also had our meeting at the SCO, and at that summit, the Russians and the Chinese were telling Jaishankar, that US was acting unilaterally and that we should not allow US to behave so. So how do you see this very complex dynamic and how India should navigate this?
If all of you have seen a kaleidoscope, अंदर वो छोटे-छोटे शीशे होते हैं. The moment you move it, new kind of figures come up. India is like that. It can be part of China, India, Russia triangle. It can be part of a quadrangle. Australia, Japan, India, and the USA. So there are the three countries, there are four countries, and both are okay with us. We are good friends with Iran. We are very good friends with Saudi Arabia also. We are one of the champions of the Palestinian cause, and we have very good relations with Israel also. Now, on the surface, it appears that these Indians are opportunists. But this is only on the surface. If you scratch the surface and go deeper, I think this is a very idealistic policy, and the goal is laudable. The goal is quarreling with none, friendship with all, right? So even if there are conflicting sides, we try to navigate in such a way that we don't make ourselves an enemy of either. Sometimes we fail, and miserably fail. but most of the time we succeed because our goal is to stay away from conflict as much as possible and promote cooperation as far as possible. That is the goal. So going to SCO, and along with the Russians and the Chinese saying that we do not accept a unilateral world order that serves India's interest. Then going with the Americans, Australians, Japanese to say that because we don't want unilateralism in the world, we do not support Chinese unilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese are taking slow and steady space to be the real hegemon in this region. We want multilateralism. We want plurilateralism. We don't want domination by either this country or that country. And in order to do that, this quadrilateral understanding and exchange of views is important. In order to keep the Americans on check, that Russia, China, India triangle is actually important. So there is no contradiction here. So on the surface, there is contradiction. Below the surface, there is complementarity. And that is the Indian way of navigating.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps, one of the last questions of the evening. So you had briefly mentioned also about the Indian Naval Symposium. And we also have the IORA and the larger Indian Ocean diplomacy and maritime diplomacy that India has been cementing on. And you also mentioned about the quantitative sort of a power asymmetry between India and China, and India finding its own map and way of doing things, and not just trying to do tit for tat or follow up on China. So based on some questions that have been raised, please throw a little more light on the characteristics of India's maritime diplomacy and how different it is and how suited it is to the promotion and protection of India's interests, and what are the challenges?
Okay. The Americans have come up with the blue dot economy, which is in parallel to the BRI proposal of China. Now, actually, in principle, India would even accept the BRI, but the whole sovereignty issue is there in POK. So we cannot accept it at all. In fact, in my own personal equation with the diplomats, when I was proposing that suppose you want to, take the route of POK, why didn't you take another route through in Indian Kashmir? And they would not accept it. So we are always ready for compromise and all. So one of the good signs of Indian diplomacy is to bargain with other countries to promote India's interest. For simple reason that India is a very peculiar country. In India, you have so many poor people. The number of poor people in India is more than the total population of Africa and Latin America. We have so many millionaires in India. The number of millionaires in India is larger than the total population of Australia. Then we have thousands of billionaires in this country. Right? So when poverty, wealth, and the middle class live together, and you have so many national languages and hundreds of other languages, all kinds of religions you can imagine, in such a complex country with so much of diversity, running a government and then managing a foreign policy is not a joke. On the one hand, we are very strong because of our policy and the democracy. On the other hand, we are very vulnerable. So when we negotiate with our partners in the Indo-Pacific on economic issues, on trade issues, RCEP thing that I just now mentioned, you see, any government in India cannot strike a deal which will go against the interest of the farmers, for example, when they're committing suicide and all. So that is why the game of balancing is very complex in India, and we try to extrapolate that in our negotiations with the rest of the world, trying to make the best of compromise. This is one. Number two, we do not want any kind of strategic alliance with any country, including the United States of America. if tomorrow the Americans will propose that let's have an alliance relationship, I'm 100% sure no government in Delhi will accept it. We are not saying yes to partnership. But I would like to convey my views to the Chinese and others who think that Indians and Americans are coming together to contain China. I would like to underline the fact that China runs a trade surplus with the USA several times more than the total trade between India and the USA. There are 85,000 Americans who are in Hong Kong and do business. The American investment in China is several times more than their investment in India. The number of Chinese students studying in America even today is more than the number of Indian students there. The Chinese investment in the US is much larger than Indian investment. So why should they complain about strategic partnership? There's nothing to complain about, right? So the underlying point is, second point is, India does not believe in any kind of alliance relationship with anyone. Number three, India believes in multilateralism, tries to promote multilateralism. It can be sub-regional grouping, it can be larger grouping, it can be extended neighborhood, different permutation and combination. It's like the Olympic rings, it can be different kind of rings together, crisscrossing each other. So it is coexistence, it's not co-conflict. That is the Indian approach. Why the symposium in the Indian Ocean? Because the role of the Navy is going to be more and more and more from times to come. The ocean is now more important than the land. And increasingly, even the outer space is becoming critical for human survival and prosperity. So the role, if the navies of the rim countries come together annually and discuss and debate and cooperate how to fight the non-traditional security threats, then what could be better than that? Look at the piracy issue, for example, or the terrorism. A handful of terrorists are going to capture power in Maldives. It was Operation Cactus of the Indian Navy which really prevented them on the high seas from reaching Maldives. Right? When there was a water crisis in Maldives, who responded first? India. Not only first, fast. When there was an earthquake in Kathmandu, who moved first? That is India. When there was tsunami in the Indian Ocean, who moved first? Before the Americans? Indians. Then the Australians, Americans, Japanese, they came to help the tsunami victims. So, and now, in fact, when in Yemen, when there was a conflict, do you know that Indian flights even picked up the Pakistanis and rescued them from the conflict zone? We did that. So this is how India tries to navigate. Underlying factor which big leaders keep talking about it, let me say that. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The entire family, entire world is one family. In the family, all children cannot be equal to the father. It is cooperative. It's not tutu meme. It's not you and me. It's no up and down. It has to run like a family. That's the Indian approach.
Thank you, sir. As we would all agree to what Professor Chintamani Mahapatra had said before he began his lecture, that after the lecture and after the Q&A, we all stand a little more enlightened, I would say a lot more enlightened, not a little more, than we were before the beginning of this lecture and before the beginning of this Q&A. To all those who had posed questions through the chat box, I believe I was able to do justice by combining many of the themes together and posing the questions to Professor Mahapatra. If I have not been able to do justice to any question, I would apologize. And I would say that more such opportunities will come, because this is only the first of the many that will the lectures that will come. And navigating India's way in the Indo-Pacific is not as simple arithmetic that we can all the questions can be answered in this such a small time. So we'll have many more such lectures and Q&A to come. Now I will welcome Dr. Vivek Mishra, the Deputy Director of KIPS, to propose a formal vote of thanks. Vivek, over to you.
Thank you, Monish. Thank you, sir, for an enlightening lecture. I thought we often forget that there is a huge continental aspect to the Indo-Pacific narrative. And I thought you mixed the maritime and the continental bit very, very successfully and very eloquently. Thank you. Let me propose a formal vote of thanks to NICE Nepal for hosting us, for collaborating with us. I think this is the beginning of a series of events that we perhaps will be doing together. Thank you everybody for joining from distant places and senior people who've joined us. Thank you, Monish, for conducting it so smoothly. Thank you all the Kalinga Institute members, colleagues, and NICE colleagues. Hopefully we'll see each other soon. I hope we all stand more enlightened. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. Pramod, please a few last words before we say good night to everyone.
First of all, thank you, sir. It was really enlightening. We learned a lot. And thanks to all the wonderful audience who posed questions and who listened to us. And like Vivek said, we'll be doing in series, maybe once in a month or once in 2 months. So we'll be meeting quite often. So thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Pramod. All the best.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Pramod.